So one of the most common tools I use on a daily basis is a pair of scissors. And for some reason, this is the pair I use. Absolutely unacceptable. It's time to make a proper pair. Now I want to make the scissors out of pattern welded steel, or Damascus steel as it's commonly known. To do that, I use two different types of steel, 15 and 20 and 20C, and I stack them alternating into one large billet with about 20 layers. Once the billet is tack welded together, I put it in the fire to heat it up. Now before I heat it up to welding temperature, I take it out and apply some borax. Now this is probably one of the top 5 most commonly asked questions on my channel. What is that white powder? So borax melts at a high temperature and creates kind of a protective shield around the billet. You see, when hot steel comes in contact with oxygen, it tends to start forming scale, and that's the last thing you want when you're forge welding. You want the welding areas to be as clean as possible for a successful weld. Once the billet is hot enough, I take it out and forge weld it together on my forge press. Now, I want to increase the layer count of the billet. There's nothing wrong with 20 layers, but the pattern I have in mind really benefits from a higher layer count. And the way that I do that is simply by cutting the billet in half, restacking it, and reforge welding it. That takes it from roughly 20 layers to somewhere around 40 layers. Now I want to take it to an even higher layer count, so I repeat the process once more. I cut it in half, restack it, and forge weld it again. So I left the billet in the forge to cool down very slowly, and I do that to anneal it and make it a little bit softer. Because I'm going to try something that I've never done before, and that is to make what's usually referred to as raindrop pattern Damascus, or pattern welded steel. So the way that it works is that you can imagine this billet has about 80 layers or so now, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to drill many tiny holes all over the billet. And when I drill a hole, it creates kind of a valley, exposing those layers all around the hole. And when I then heat it up and flatten those valleys out, the layers will still be exposed, creating that raindrop pattern. That's the idea anyway. Now, just to be clear, the holes that I am drilling does not go all the way through the billet. They are just a few millimeters deep, and they also vary in size. Alright, so that went very well, I think. The valleys have now been flattened, and I could give this a quick grind and etch right now, to see if it looks good or not. However, I prefer to wait and leave it as a surprise for later. Anyway, the next thing to do is to cut this in appropriate sizes and start forging the blades of the scissor. Now, I'm choosing to cut this lengthwise, and it might seem a little bit strange at first, but the reason for this is that the pattern is already kind of established, so any further forging and shaping would change that pattern. By cutting it like this, I'm trying to maintain as much of it as possible. That being said, not all forging and shaping is bad for the pattern. For example, by forging a tip and giving it a simple blade shape, the pattern will naturally follow that shape. And since it's very little forging, the pattern will most likely maintain its characteristics. After the blade is formed, it's time to start focusing on the handle, or the grip of the scissors. And I begin by forging a small set down which will act as a guide and a transition into the handle. Once the first blade and handle is drawn out, I simply repeat the process for the second one. I made a small drawing to use for reference. It can be a great way to manage proportions, especially when you're working with more complicated shapes. In this case, I use it to get a better understanding of how long the handle actually needs to be. I simply take a piece of cord and follow the shape of the drawing. The time has finally come to start shaping the handle of the scissors. And I begin by bending the very end just slightly, creating a small pigtail. I then shift my focus to the area just in front of the blade. It has a quite distinct bend to it, so it's much better to get that done before moving on to the more delicate forging. Once the first blade is finished, I move on to the second one. Alright, so this is starting to look like a proper pair of scissors now. Is that how you say it? Is this a pair of scissors or is it just a scissor? Anyway, you know it's funny in this project, like after every step I have to stop and pause and try to figure out what to do next. Now I can confidently make weird axe videos because I have made so many regular axes before, but scissors, well, that's a first. So I guess the next step is to grind this, maybe establish a rough edge, maybe drill the hole for the pin. So let's do all of them, I guess. So if I were to put the scissors together now, the handles would be out of line with each other. They wouldn't be very comfortable to hold and they wouldn't have a natural stop. I could just spin one blade round, and we don't want that. So to fix that, I need to grind the inside of each blade down to about half its thickness. That way, when the blades are assembled, the total thickness matches the handle and everything lines up the way it should. I've got to say, it's a pretty majestic feeling putting the scissors together for the first time. Anyway, it's time to start working on the bevels of the blades. And I choose to use files for this, since I really want to be careful not to accidentally grind too far. It's time for heat treatment, and the first step is to normalize the blades. I do that by simply heating them up and letting them cool down slowly at room temperature. That normalizes the grain structure and makes them ready for hardening. Both 15 and 20 and 20C are oil hardening steels, so I prepare the oil by preheating it slightly. Next, I slowly and carefully heat up one blade at a time, and once it's ready, I quench it in the oil to make it hard. After hardening, I use some of the remaining heat from the forge to temper the blades, and then I put them in the oven. Alright, so the blades are now hardened and it's almost time to put them together. But before we do that, there are still a few things left to do. Now for a pair of scissors to get their cutting function, there needs to be a slight bend to the blades. That way, when the two blades meet, it's almost like they pull and grab the thing that you're cutting, shearing it off, kinda. So before we pin these together, we first need to bend them slightly. And before we do that, I think it's a good idea to start by first making them flat. I'm not gonna lie, that was super scary, but it seems to have worked out alright. And the blades now have a slight bend. It's time for hand sanding. Now this is a long and very repetitive process. Now I start out with a 180 grit sandpaper and the idea is to sand it until it looks good everywhere. I then switch to a 240 grit sandpaper and keep going until all the 180 grit scratches are gone. After that I move on to 320 and so on until I'm happy with it. How far you take this is really up to you. Personally, I stop at a sloppy 800 grit, but if you want to go further, you most definitely can. Alright, so the blades are now in the ferric chloride, and the idea is that I'm going to leave them in there for about 10 minutes, then I'm going to take them out, rinse them, give them a quick polish with some fine grit sandpaper, and then I'll simply repeat that process until I'm happy. However, we do have a little bit of a problem. You see, when you're etching, the etchant is eating away a little bit of the steel, creating kind of a texture following the pattern of the pattern welded steel, and that's fine and all, that's actually what you want. However, you can imagine cutting with a pair of scissors that has a bunch of textures and micro grooves in it. It's not going to cut very well. So how do you fix that? Well, one way would be to put some nail polish on the inside and then only etch the outside of the blades. However, I want to see if we can get the best of both worlds. And my idea is that when I take it out, I'm going to see if I can be a little bit more aggressive while polishing the inside of the blades. That way I think I will prevent some of that aggressive texturing on the inside of the blades. Will it work? I have no idea, but it's definitely worth a try. I want to do some copper wire wrapping on the handle. And it's funny with copper, the way that you make it softer is actually the exact opposite from steel. So you heat it up and quench it in water and it gets super bendy and soft, which feels a little bit weird to say the least. Now I chose to go with a copper pin, for two reasons mainly. First, I thought it would look good together with a copper wire wrap. And secondly, I'm not much of a rivet guy, and somehow copper feels easier to rivet than steel. Now only one thing remains, and that is to give the scissors a sharp edge. And luckily for me, my friends over at Tormek sent this pretty amazing scissor jig that I got to try out. You simply install the platen that has a quick bevel guide, you fasten the scissor to the actual jig, and then you're ready to go. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now Tormek is a long-time friend and channel sponsor, and if you want to check them out, there is a link in the description and in the pinned comment. Well, I am very happy with how this turned out. Please let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.